Where's the next shell? We're out! We can't fire! Move! Make room for Wojtek! Wojtek?
No, this isn't a Disney movie. During World War II, a real brown bear became an officially enlisted soldier, marched across the Middle East with the Polish army, carried artillery shells through one of the fiercest battles of the war, and earned the respect of men who had already lost almost everything. It sounds impossible, but every part of this story is true, and by the end, you'll understand why those men never remembered Wojtek as an animal. They remembered him as one of their own. Our story begins in 1942, far from the battlefields of Europe, in the rugged mountains of Iran. A tiny Syrian brown bear cub had just lost everything after hunters killed his mother, leaving him frightened, hungry, and too young to survive alone. At almost the same moment, thousands of Polish soldiers were making an impossible journey of their own. Their homeland had been invaded, many had lost their families, and the lives they once knew had disappeared behind them. Neither the frightened cub nor the exhausted men knew it yet, but they were about to rescue each other in ways none of them could have imagined. One afternoon, their path crossed with a young shepherd carrying something unusual in his arms. It wasn't food, it wasn't supplies, it was the frightened little cub. One of the men slowly stepped forward, knelt in the dirt, and reached into his pack. Instead of drawing a weapon, he offered the trembling cub a small piece of fruit. The little bear hesitated, sniffing the air as the wind carried unfamiliar scents across the mountains. One cautious step became two, and after a long pause, he finally accepted the food. It looked like an ordinary act of kindness, but history often changes in moments so small that nobody notices them until years later. The men decided to buy the cub from the shepherd and take him with them. They named him Wojtek, a Polish name often translated as "he who enjoys war." The name couldn't have been more ironic. There was nothing fierce about him. He was simply an orphan searching for somewhere he belonged, while the men who surrounded him were searching for exactly the same thing. Without anyone realizing it, a family was beginning to form. As the weeks passed, Wojtek stopped behaving like a wild animal and started behaving like the people around him. He marched beside them through endless stretches of desert, slept beside their tents beneath cold night skies, and greeted familiar faces each morning as though he'd always belonged there. Because he was still too young to feed himself properly, they gave him condensed milk from an old bottle and watched him grow stronger with every passing week. Before long, the orphan cub who had once wandered alone had become the heart of the camp. Whenever the men finally found a rare moment to laugh, Wojtek was always nearby. He loved wrestling after long days of marching, playfully knocking exhausted troops into the dust before collapsing beside them like an oversized puppy. According to the men who served with him, he even developed a taste for an occasional sip of beer, not because anyone wanted to teach a bear human habits, but because he simply copied the people he trusted. For a little while, the horrors of war disappeared, replaced by laughter echoing through the camp. In a world that had taken so much from them, Wojtek quietly gave something back. Then, the journey changed once again. The Polish Second Corps received orders to sail for Italy, where some of the fiercest fighting of the entire war awaited them. As equipment, ammunition, and supplies were loaded onto British transport ships, one unexpected problem threatened to separate them forever. Military regulations were clear. Pets were not allowed aboard. Leaving Wojtek behind was unthinkable. He had marched beside them across deserts, slept beside them under the stars, and become a reminder that kindness could still exist in a world consumed by violence. So the men came up with one of the strangest solutions in military history. If pets weren't allowed, then Wojtek simply wouldn't be a pet anymore. He was officially enlisted into the Polish army, complete with a rank, a serial number, and his own food rations. On paper, it sounded ridiculous. A bear, listed as a soldier. But nobody knew that the paperwork they were laughing about was about to become part of one of the most extraordinary stories of the Second World War. In 1944, the unit arrived at Monte Cassino, where the mountains shook beneath relentless artillery fire. Thick smoke rolled across the battlefield, explosions tore through the hillsides, and exhausted ammunition crews struggled to keep the guns firing. Every shell had to be carried by hand across mud, rubble, and constant enemy bombardment. The men had been lifting heavy ammunition for hours, their uniforms soaked with sweat and covered in dirt. their bodies pushed to the limit. Wojtek had spent months watching them work. No one had trained him. No one had shown him what to do. He had simply watched the people he trusted every single day. Then in the middle of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. As shells exploded around them, Wojtek calmly walked toward a stack of ammunition crates. The men paused, unsure of what he was about to do. Wrapping his enormous paws around a heavy artillery shell, he lifted it with surprising ease and carried it across the battlefield. He gently placed it beside the waiting artillery crew, turned around without hesitation, and walked back for another. Then another, and another. The explosions never stopped. The smoke never cleared. Yet through the chaos, the giant bear continued making trip after trip, as though he understood exactly what needed to be done. Some of the men stopped for a brief moment, watching in complete disbelief before returning to their work. Others could only smile through the exhaustion. In one of the darkest battles of the war, the orphaned cub they had rescued years earlier was now helping carry the weight they could no longer carry alone. After Monte Cassino, Wojtek was no longer just the unit's mascot. He had become part of its identity. The company even adopted a new emblem showing a bear carrying an artillery shell, a symbol inspired by what those men had witnessed with their own eyes. It wasn't created as a joke, it was a tribute. When the war finally ended, the men returned to lives that had been changed forever, while Wojtek spent the rest of his days at Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland. Yet the bond they had built refused to disappear. Former comrades would visit him, call his name in Polish, and witnesses recalled that the old bear still recognized the familiar voices of the men he had marched beside years before. Time had changed everything, except their friendship. Today, statues of Wojtek stand across Poland, Scotland, and other parts of Europe. Not because he changed the outcome of the war, but because he changed the people who fought in it. In a world defined by loss, an orphaned cub and a group of displaced soldiers found hope in one another, proving that loyalty, courage, and compassion can survive even the darkest chapters of history. Perhaps that's why, more than 80 years later, people still tell his story. Not because it's unbelievable, but because deep down, we all want to believe that even in humanity's darkest moments, kindness can still march beside us. If reality can tell stories like this, imagine what else history has been hiding. Subscribe to Grey Room, where every story sounds like fiction, until you discover it really happened.